just as disgusted that any congressional representative is going to run to El Salvador his aid.
I'm simply asking him to open the door of CCOT and let this innocent man walk out.
If you stand up and want to protest, if you want to shout and chant, we will have you removed.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, we have to start here. Held in contempt, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg said there is probable cause to believe that the Trump administration can and should be held in criminal contempt for its deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members. What that could mean for the president's immigration plans, and just as importantly, the rule of law in this country and the juxtaposition of powers between executive and judicial branches. Looking for Kilmar, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat, is in El Salvador. He went there today. His efforts to get inside the notorious CCOT prison to see the mistakenly deported man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Attorney General has ruled out bringing the Maryland father back home.
ICE testified. An immigration judge ruled he was a member of MS-13. An appellate judge ruled he was a member of MS-13. Hard stop. He should not be in our country.
Worst of the worst. That was what President Trump said about migrants being sent under his administration policies to Guantanamo Bay.
We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people.
But new exclusive CBS News reporting tells a very different story. A look at the government memo that set out broad rules in which migrants without criminal records could be flown and housed at Gitmo. And we made it one day on the show without having a reference to the stock market in the lead. But we're back at it. Why? Well, because stocks sank. The markets fell sharply, all three of them, after concerns were expressed by Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell about the possible economic impact of tariffs and other uncertainties. We'll have more on that later this hour. We're also covering the latest on tariff news with Olivia Rinaldi, but we start tonight with Scott MacFarlane and Camilo Montoya Galvez. Camilo, catch us up on what we've been hearing about. Where's Camilo? Never mind. I'm just going. There we go. Hi, there we are. There you are, Major. Camilo. See, they were hiding you from me for a second. Catch us up on what happened today on the migrants and your reporting related to Guantanamo Bay.
Sure. So when President Trump ordered officials to convert the naval base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, into a massive detention facility for thousands of migrants who were in the country illegally, he promised to send the worst of the worst to that site and also to prioritize the detention of dangerous criminals there. But we have found that according to the agreement between the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security governing the operations at Guantanamo Bay, the administration gave officials broad and wide-ranging discretion, Major, to decide who to send to Guantanamo Bay, including the ability to transfer detainees there who lacked any serious criminal record in the U.S. or any at all. The conditions are very broad and sweeping in scope and include migrants who are suspected of using a smuggler, Major, to enter the U.S. illegally. That can cover many of the migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, Major, because, as you know, the cartels and other criminal groups control most of the illicit movement of people and drugs along the U.S.-Mexico border, and typically migrants have to pay them to be able to get safe passage and cross the border. And so we have learned that the administration has been sending non-criminal migrants to Guantanamo Bay. In fact, we learned that there are right now 42 migrants held at Guantanamo Bay, and 32 of them, the majority of them, are considered to be low risk, meaning that they lack any serious criminal record in the U.S. or in other countries.
And Camilo, as I understand it, because I want to zero in on this thing you said about using the cartels to get you to the border. As I understand it, the memo basically says if that happened, you are thereby as a migrant associated with a criminal organization.
That's right.
And therefore, your association makes you eligible for this deportation to Gitmo, even though you have no criminal record.
And the memo, Major, is actually more sweeping than that definition. If officials cannot adequately and accurately determine the nature of the entry of a migrant into the U.S., they can still assert that the migrant likely paid a smuggler to enter the U.S. if that person hails from a country where the majority of people use a smuggler to enter the U.S. So there's no criminality assessment here to send migrants to Guantanamo Bay, and the criteria are very broad in scope.
Understanding how this happens begins and ends with memoranda like this. Exclusive reporting from Camila Montoya Galvez. I'm so glad we found you on camera. That's a great relief to me. Great reporting. Thanks so much, Camila.
Thanks, Major.
Scott McFarland is here. Olivia Rinaldi is here. Scott, catch us up on what we led off the show with. Judge Boasberg saying that there is probable cause to believe criminal contempt could be the next step in this ongoing clash with the Trump administration over the flights of Venezuelan alleged gang members to El Salvador.
These March 15th deportation flights have triggered this marathon of legal cases, and we're still somewhere around the middle mileposts, but we've hit a big milepost today. The chief judge here in Washington, James Boasberg, says there's probable cause to believe the Trump administration has engaged in contempt of court. That is a big, provocative accusation to make or order for a judge to issue.
And the contemptuous behavior is basically not responding and not explaining why certain actions were or were not taken after an oral and then written order from the court.
Yeah, what's more, I mean, he ordered the planes turned around, if necessary, to keep those deportations from happening until he could review whether there was due process or not. The planes weren't turned around. He's asked declarative point-blank questions in the months since, hasn't gotten answers to his questions, so he's starting a process. Now, what happens next? If there's a contempt of court finding by the judge, he will allow the person accused, in this case the Trump administration, to purge that contempt. You want to honor the initial order? You want to do something else to rectify the matter? You can do that. If you don't, and the Trump administration's given no indication it's going to yield to the judge here, then he begins sworn testimony, calls to the stand members of the Trump administration, or for sworn depositions, key members of the Trump administration. If that doesn't rectify things, he can appoint a prosecutor to try to make a case. That's going to take months, which is why I say we're in a marathon and we're at some uncertain milepost somewhere in the middle.
And Scott, we've discussed this before, but I think it's worth laying down again. As often as we talk about this, there's the court process, then there's the political conversation about it. And the White House believes fundamentally it is winning the political conversation about this.
Let's look back at this day in which a federal judge found probable cause the Trump administration was in contempt of court on the deportations. The U.S. Attorney General had a news conference this morning on an unrelated topic, talked about the deportations. The White House called an emergency briefing this afternoon with the press secretary and a family impacted by gang violence, talking about deportations. And, oh, by the way, they also posted out old court records involving one of those deportees, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, on their social media platforms. They seem to be rushing toward this topic in this debate.
Olivia, you're here. I'm so glad. We talked about tariffs in the open. I want to play for you some sound from the Wayback Machine. Donald Trump in the 1980s. Control room, please. I know you have that teed up. Play it for us.
If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They don't have laws against it. They just make it impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs, they knock the hell out of our companies. And, hey, I have tremendous respect for the Japanese people. I mean, you can respect somebody that's beating the hell out of you, but they are beating the hell out of this country.
Quick update on the technology front. VCR, for those who may not remember, video cassette recorder. That's how people my age used to watch movies, okay? So, Olivia, we bring this up not only to refer to Oprah and the Wayback Machine and VCRs, but the Japanese are here talking about possible trade negotiations and deals with the administration.
Yeah, certainly something they haven't wanted to talk about, right? The stock market down today. They haven't wanted to talk about the economy or tariffs. But here Trump is wrestling his way into negotiations that are happening between Secretary Lutnick and Secretary Bessent and the Japanese about their tariffs. Now, the Japanese are the first country to really send an economic delegation over here to the White House to have these conversations. And Trump, we know, paused those reciprocal tariffs. There was about a 24% reciprocal tariff that was going to go on Japanese goods. That's not happening just as of yet, but there's still that 10% blanket tariff and a 25% tariff on cars, automobile parts, steel, aluminum, things that certainly go into cars, and those are still in effect. So the Japanese are here today because clearly this is something that's going to hit their economy. They're trying to find a path forward in the next 90 days while there is this pause on tariffs. But the White House certainly is not putting forth a lot of information exactly about when this meeting was, who on the Japanese side took part of it, what the readout was, what Trump said. We're working on trying to find out that information. They haven't been forthcoming, but this all comes as the stock market took another nosedive today. We heard from Fed Chair Powell, who said that the outlook on the economy, particularly for the car industry, is going to suffer for years and years to come. That is rattling markets globally.
And Olivia, to that point, the retail sales indicators today from the Commerce Department showed lots of retail sales. The explanation for that was Americans looked around and said, wait a minute, tariffs may be coming.
No. Yeah.
Let's go buy now.
Right.
And lots of retailers, whether you're selling cars or shirts or something else, pulled forward inventory. So there was plenty of things to buy. People bought them. But what does that mean going forward? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows what it means. And look, that inventory only lasts for so long, but a lot of people went out and bought cars. A lot of, locally owned dealerships said, hey, we're having deals, come buy these because we need to insulate ourselves for whatever is going to come. They don't know what this is going to look like in 90 days. And certainly on some uncertain economic level, feels very shaky, not only for car industry, but steel industry, on pharmaceutical industry. We're still waiting for all of those tariffs that Trump promised on not only pharmaceuticals, but semiconductor chips. Those are also huge, huge issue that is not only economic, but national security-wise as well. So they're certainly trying to get out ahead of this, make some deals with some of these countries. But again, this is all happening in back rooms and under the cover of darkness. We've been trying to figure out what exactly is going on and who's talking to who.
We're all trying to see the light. Olivia Rinaldi, Scott McFarland, and he was once lost, but then he was quickly found. Camila Montoya Galvez in New York. There you go. Thanks so much. Next, a warning, as Olivia just talked about, from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, the potential impact of President Trump's tariffs and the effect it had on the markets. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Stocks fell, all the indices, sharply today, due in part to concerns about tariffs. Listen.
Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. The inflationary effects could also be more persistent. Avoiding that outcome will depend on the size of the effects, on how long it takes for them to pass through fully to prices, and ultimately on keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored.
That is Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. This is CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, great to see you as always. So you know and I know, and our audience now knows, because we're going to tell them, that what the Fed chair said was not a surprise necessarily, but it tamped down any psychic expectations the market might have had, well-placed or not, that interest rate cuts were coming anytime soon.
Oh, absolutely. And you know just as well as I do, Major, that Jerome Powell tends to be very tempered with his language. So to hear him say something like persistent inflation, it's not the first time we've heard him say that, but the fact that he's getting more comfortable saying that language, certainly investors didn't like it. The two things that really stood out to me, Major, and I feel like impacted investors this afternoon, one, that there's the potential for stagflation, because he said we could be in a challenging environment where our dual mandates are at odds. And of course, the dual mandate for the Fed, keep inflation down and also keep the labor market strong, keep the economic growth going. When you have those two at odds, that's when you get stagflation. And he also said the data is showing that we are seeing some economic slowdown in terms of growth. And Powell and the Fed, they are data driven. And so the second he started speaking, Major, you know, I always love to throw up a chart of the Dow when Fed Chair Powell starts speaking. It fell off a cliff Because, yes, we are not getting interest rate cuts anytime soon because of that worry about inflation.
And there was a lot of volatility within the NASDAQ, the tech-driven NASDAQ, and a good portion of that, as I understand it, was about NVIDIA.
That's right. So NVIDIA shared with everyone yesterday evening after the markets closed that they're going to see a $5.5 billion hit to their bottom line this quarter. The reason being some unexpected export restrictions. Now, the government a week ago said to NVIDIA, you cannot sell your chip that you designed to sell to China without getting a license. China's a really big market for NVIDIA, and in the past, licenses have not been granted when they go to the government. So this is really just an escalation of that tit-for-tat trade war, but really, really hitting NVIDIA when it comes to future growth.
With the answers, as always, Kelly O'Grady, thanks so very much. How are federal cuts to spending impacting various states? Well, the Connecticut's governor, Democrat Ned Lamont, joins me next to describe what's going on in Connecticut, his fair state. That's next right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Federal funding cuts have already impacted health care, education, other programs in Connecticut. Now, the state wants to hear from those who feel the squeeze and maybe feel it more than others. Democratic Governor Ned Lamont today launched an online tool through which Connecticut businesses, nonprofits, and cities can report impacts directly to his office. And the governor joins me now. Governor, good to see you. Seems like this is an effort to verify and humanize something you already know.
Hey, Major, great to see you. Look, the incoming from Washington is, every day or even more frequent. We got to know how it impacts people. It impacts our universities, it impacts our not-for-profits. I got commissioners, sometimes the portal for childcare turns on, sometimes it's off. So this online portal is one way we can help keep up and manage.
So the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, today filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration over tariffs, saying that they're illegally applied and that he's already having to rewrite his own budget because of the economic impacts. Two questions. Do you support that idea of suing the Trump administration over the imposition of tariffs? And is your own state budget having to be rewritten because of them?
I don't think so, but I can tell you that tariffs are incredible uncertainty. They're putting a drag upon our economy. We're a big aerospace state, so we import, say, $3.5 billion worth of parts from Canada. That's going to add to the price of jet engines at Pratt & Whitney. If they want to put 20 or 30% on hydropower, that's going to jack up the price of electricity in my region. It's tariff is a 6-letter word for tax, and it's costing us a lot.
Some of these federal spending cutbacks are related to diversity, equity, inclusion. How do you process that? And what is your answer to administration assertions repeated over and over that anything that is DEI is by its very nature racist?
I think it's so far off. We have a group, we work, we go to every single neighborhood in the state. We work very hard to make sure the best and the brightest, whatever your background, have an opportunity to serve in state government, to be a teacher, to be an engineer. We do have somebody who's in charge of opportunity for our state. She comes out of Pratt & Whitney, that woke jet engine company, making sure the best and brightest do that. Look, I don't care about the word DEI, but I do care about the word opportunity. We're not going to change our stripes.
And Governor, as I understand it, at least 50 students with visas studying in Connecticut have had those visas revoked by the Trump administration. Is there anything you can do to stop that? And what effect do you think that's having on education in Connecticut?
Look, our universities are one of our greatest strengths here as a state and as a country. People from around the world want to come to Connecticut, come to America. We're scaring them off. We're saying you're not welcome. And by the way, Major, I've got a lot of Hispanic kids who are afraid to go to school right now and are staying home. They're just going to wait and see. All that talk about mass deportation is just slowing down opportunity for these kids.
Is there anything you as the governor can do to either voice your concerns or help these people who are so nervous about the current situation?
I could tell these kids, come to school, you're safe in school. Our teachers are teaching. We're not asking people immigration status. We're not getting involved in that. We want you to come to school. We need you. Same for our universities. We want those people there. We'll do everything we can to protect you. But look, you're right. All of a sudden, 50 people lose their visas. They're good kids doing the right thing in our colleges. They want to make a difference. Now they're going home.
Governor, I want to ask you about, you mentioned the universities in Connecticut. Of course, New Haven is home to Yale, a great university in America, often mentioned next to Harvard. Harvard has now fought the administration, will fight the administration over its attempt to, and I will quote the Wall Street Journal editorial board this morning, micromanage Harvard's hiring practices and lots of other things unrelated to anti-Semitism. Do you fear that Yale could be next? I know there's an effort to fortify Yale, to resist anything from the Trump administration. Evaluate what you see playing out right now.
I hope that Yale and Trinity and Wesleyan and Fairfield and UConn and all of our great universities follow Harvard's lead. You don't need the heavy hand of the federal government telling these institutions how to teach, how to hire, and who to recruit as students. Let the great universities handle it themselves.
And do you think there is something larger at stake here when it comes to this effort to get into the day-to-day management of a great American university like Harvard, because Yale might be next?
Look, there's a lot at stake. It's billions of dollars that Harvard put at risk by saying we're not going to compromise the academic independence of our institution. Look, they have great researchers who are being recruited by colleges in Canada and colleges in Europe and colleges in China saying you can study here, you can research here with no strings attached. We got to make sure that we maintain our academic independence.
And there is a heavy New England focus to our conversation, Governor, not Connecticut, but Maine. Also getting very aggressive treatment by the Trump administration over the question of transgender athletes in women's sports. How do you evaluate that issue and what's going on in Maine?
I was sitting next to Governor Janet Mills at that meeting at the White House where President Trump, at the end of about 45 minutes, says, "Where's that Governor Maine? I saw on social media there may be a trans athlete running. We're going to dock you, $100 million. She said, I'll see you in court. You know what he said? I am the law. We are the law. She said, I'll see you in court. You got to watch out. I mean, this is a great encroachment of the federal government on our individual liberties. I hope more people stand up like Janet Mills and Harvard did.
Governor, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Several town halls hosted by Republican members of Congress have gotten a little bit rowdy, and there's some video evidence right there. But a new level of that was seen last night at a town hall hosted by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Also, it might be one of the hottest political tickets in town, two progressive politicians firing up crowds and, by the way, racking up massive fundraising numbers. Next, how the Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, quote-unquote, fighting oligarchy tour is making some waves. That's next, right here on America Decides.
It's not just about me or about Bernie. It's about you all coming together in this space as we prepare for our future.
That was Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Bakersfield, California last night. This afternoon, Bernie Sanders and AOC, as she's also known, were in Missoula, Montana, where a similar scene played out. Packed arena full of, we should assume, progressive supporters. We're joined now by CBS News political correspondent Nydia Cavazos, who's coming to us from Los Angeles, who has been covering this tour for CBS News. Nydia, what have you seen so far, and what do you think are the important takeaways of the size of the crowds and the kind of energy that has been visible within them?
Major, what we're seeing on the ground is definitely very large crowds across this multi-state tour that Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders have embarked on. It's called Fighting Oligarchy. And what they're trying to convey here is that they're protesting against what they say is an extreme concentration of power coming from the White House. Of course, this is referring to President Trump and even Elon Musk, given his involvement that we've seen in the government since Trump took office in January. Now, we are seeing that there are many progressives who, of course, are attending as they've long supported AOC and Bernie Sanders. But what we're also seeing is conservatives who are showing up to these rallies, as they say, they're a bit surprised at what Trump is doing and at the speed at which everything is occurring, referring to the policies coming from Washington, D.C. And it's important to note that these rallies are being held in districts that are currently being represented by Republicans in Congress, or that are also counties that Trump won in 2016, 2020, and 2024. So what Bernie Sanders and AOC are trying to do here is show that with these large crowds, that there are many Americans who are not necessarily at ease with what they're seeing coming from the executive branch.
To that point, Nydia, Bakersfield, that's Trump country. They were in Nampa, Idaho. That's just outside of Boise, also Trump country. Missoula, Montana, Trump country. And clearly, those are not the kinds of places where you would expect the local population to create crowds this large, meaning people are coming from elsewhere to get to these spots. That also has to be something worth taking note of.
That's worth noting because in LA, there was a rally over the weekend and there was a very large crowd, over 36,000 people. But of course, that's expected because you might say that's LA, tends to lean left. There are many progressives here. But what we saw yesterday in Bakersfield, California, for example, or in Idaho or Utah, is that AOC and Bernie Sanders are filling up these venues where there are many, many conservatives. These are cities that are dominated by Republicans. And yesterday in Bakersfield, California, for example, we also saw that there were many Latinos who were showing up, and they're protesting what they've been seeing across the issue of immigration, because Bakersfield is in Kern County, and Kern County is a county that made national headlines in January with immigration rates. And so this is something that was frowned upon by many conservatives, including conservative farmers who said just stay off the fields. And even when Border Patrol officials and immigration officials argued that this was a targeted operation. So you have an entire communities of farm workers, farmers, and residents who are witnessing what's going on, and they're not necessarily at ease. And this is why they're showing up to these rallies, considering the fact that they're not all progressives here.
And Nydia, one other part of this is they're not just traveling, drawing crowds, they're raising money.
That's correct. AOC managed to raise over $9.5 million in just the first 3 months of 2025. And Sanders himself raised over $11 million, and this is just in 3 months. For AOC, this would represent her strongest quarter ever since coming into the political arena. And so this speaks volumes of what the tour is, on the tour's success. They're managing to make some waves here, and people are being receptive toward their message. With AOC, for example, over 266,000 people donated. This was individual contributions, with the average donation being of only $21. And of course, this is something that they've touted along their rallies, that this is a people-powered movement, and they don't necessarily have to rely on corporate PAC money and therefore can actually create their own agenda and serve their people. This is their main argument, of course.
Nydia Cavazos, as always, thanks so very much. Different scene playing out at a town hall hosted by Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene in rural Georgia last night. 2 people, including the man you see in this video, subdued by police with stun guns. 3 people attending that town hall were arrested. I want to bring in our reporter panel. Riley Rogerson, reporter for Notice. Remember, that's News of the U.S. And Sophia Kai covers the White House for Politico. Great to have you both here. And the audience, you don't know this. You went to high school together in New Jersey. So this is like some kind of really cool journalistic reunion.
Exactly.
So welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I will send an email to the reunion organizers just so
sure
they know this
that.
part of it's already been achieved. So let's just do one real quick thing about AOC and $9.5 million in a quarter. That's senatorial fundraising numbers. Your impression.
Huge numbers for her. Like was mentioned, this is a record-breaking sum. As the Democratic Party is looking for leadership right now, it's particularly noteworthy that she's bringing in these numbers given her tour.
And everyone in politics pays attention to who raises what and how much.
Absolutely.
Sophia?
Absolutely. And I think like this could be a sign that Democrats are somewhat turning a corner after their loss in November. I think for months, you know, there was a lot of stewing going on, a lot of we don't know what to do. And I think there's still a lot of that. Especially on Capitol Hill, but I think elsewhere around the country, you see these tours and these events gathering tens of thousands, and I think that's pretty notable.
And we showed some of the video from the Marjorie Taylor Greene town hall. How do you process that, and how do you think that fits into how the nation is watching the political conversation in the country?
What I think is really interesting about that town hall is the fact that the head of the House Republicans campaign arm Richard Hudson, has been advising Republicans not to host town halls like that,
right,
for fear that they would get rowdy. There were a couple town halls earlier this year that went, frankly, kind of off the rails, and I think they're concerned about that happening. Of course, House Republicans are saying it's much easier and cheaper to do tele-town halls. You can reach way more constituents that way. Democrats have turned around and said, oh, that's ridiculous, and now you see members like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are excited about what the Trump administration's doing, excited about being a messenger for it, putting herself out there with a town hall, and now we see how that went.
And Sophia, but opening was sort of a warning. If you want to be disruptive, you're going to be arrested and stun guns.
Yeah, I think MTG appeared to cheer how that was handled. I think, look, like it captures a moment in time, but I think it hits on two hot button issues: immigration, which is happening now, and we see the Trump administration sort of refusing to return the man who was deported to El Salvador. And you also see that another huge issue that is getting people's emotions really riled up, which is just this sort of slashing of the federal government, and that's continuing to happen in the background. And I think, you've got federal workers and everyone who knows a federal worker who's been impacted by that. And so I think that's the second issue that some folks are reacting to.
And always worth reminding our audience that 80% of the federal workforce lives outside of Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, meaning they're all over the country. So, Riley, you wrote, Democrats wonder. Of course, that's a headline that could be applied almost universally. Democrats wonder, in this case, the rest of it goes, if Hakeem Jeffries can meet the moment. We just heard AOC refer to this moment. Is he? Can he? What's the sense within the House Democratic Caucus?
I think people are waiting to see exactly how he's going to proceed. Hakeem Jeffries is a younger leader of Democrats. Right now, their bench, when you look around, there's a lot of older, thinking minority leader, Chuck Schumer being one of them. So people are looking for young talent in the Democratic Party. And of course, he already has, 212 House Democrats who work with him. So,
and you had some people who went on the record saying, I wonder about this.
Exactly.
I'm not sure.
What they're really looking
and
for...
And sort of the specter of Nancy Pelosi in the background, Speaker Emerita, is also part of this conversation.
Absolutely. And I think what they want to see, and the members we had on the record were, we want to see him sort of doing what AOC is doing.
More visible,
going out there,
more
being
assertive.
out there, being in the media more, doing more town halls. I think Congressman Jared Huffman said, I'm encouraging a road show. And that is kind of precisely what AOC is doing. We have seen Hakeem Jeffries do more of that in just recent weeks. He's been out and about. He's been doing media. His fundraising numbers, speaking of fundraising, have been very strong. And I think Democrats have taken note of that. And for the piece, we also talked to AOC about, how does Leader Jeffries fit into this moment? And her response was, this is a team effort, and everyone has their role. So we'll continue to see how this shakes out.
And there's always Team AOC. There's always Team AOC. So, Sophia, something else that's really interesting. The vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, David Hogg, has created a PAC with $20 million, not to run against Republicans, but to run against Democrats, who he says are unable or unwilling to meet the moment. Again, that phrase keeps popping up in our conversation, the moment. That is astonishing.
Yes, and I think the reason that this is noteworthy is because he's running against Democrats, and what that means is that it's the first real acknowledgement.
I mean, they're going to be primaried
Right.
if they don't get more active, assertive, aggressive, visible.
And he's not named any names right now. So that's number one. I think number two, it's really the first acknowledgement coming from within the Democratic Party that's saying what we're doing is not working. So he said, look, it's not just about out with the old and with the new, it's also about out with the ineffective.
And to your point, Riley, about generational things, it's not for those in the swing districts, the frontline Democrats, so-called in the House.
Right.
It's safe blue seat, meaning maybe ones with seniority who are not doing enough in the estimation of the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee.
Right. And it's worth noting, he's 25 years old. He's been a huge advocate for generational change within the Democratic Party, and he has been supported. He's a DNC vice chair. There are members of the party who must, like what he's saying.
And raising money to try to do it. One other thing real quick. Elise Stefanik had been nominated to be the UN ambassador. That was pulled so the House Republicans could keep one more vote because they know every vote is precious. now possibly in a play for solidifying her return to House Republican leadership, or maybe she's serious about it. We've confirmed here at CBS News she's looking at running for governor in New York. Sophia?
Yeah, I think it just means that she's an ambitious person. Look, it's
Welcome to Washington, ladies and gentlemen.
It means, you know, she's kind of always looking for what's next, right? She's also kind of, you know, her allies have also said that she's open to a number of other things, like another nomination from Trump, seeing that Republicans kind of picked up a couple seats and they're safer in that respect. But I think definitely Stefanik, she's young, she's someone to keep an eye on in the MAGA world.
It was a brief but delightful high school reunion. Riley Rogerson, Sophia Kai, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Turning Point, the Vietnam War, the new docuseries that had exclusive access to CBS News archives. My conversation with the director. Next, right here on America Decides.
Hundreds died here. Here in these ruins can be seen physical evidence of the Viet Cong's Tet Offensive. But far less tangible is what these ruins mean, and like everything else in this burned and blasted and weary land, they mean success or setback, victory or defeat, depending upon whom you talk to.
Walter Cronkite, anchor of the CBS Evening News, brought the triumphs, the travails, and the tragedies of the Vietnam War into American living rooms every single night. Now, a new docuseries on Netflix takes a fresh look at the conflict using extensive interviews, CBS News archives, and declassified government records.
There's a stark difference between the before and the after when it comes to the Vietnam War. And one of those turning points is this thing called the credibility gap. That's a gap between what the government is telling you and what is actually happening on the ground.
Earlier this week, I spoke with director Brian Knappenberger for a first look at his series, Turning Point, the Vietnam War. There is an entire generation or two of Americans who know next to nothing about Vietnam. Is your film for them or for us who are still traumatized by it because we lived through some parts of it?
Well, I think it's both. It has a lot of people that were that went to Vietnam, that were around at that period of time, and in which the legacy is still raw. But I do believe that legacy and the effects of the Vietnam War are still very much with us right now. This was a very much a turning point in American history. The America that existed, you know, before the United States engaged militarily in Vietnam was just a radically different country than the America that emerged after our troops came home. And that America that emerged contained the roots of a lot of what plagues our society today, I think. Widespread alienation, deep cynicism, a profound distrust in government, breakdown in our civic institutions. And, you know, the military lessons were just as profound. The Vietnam War forced a serious reckoning with America's role in the world. And yet those lessons were largely ignored, leading to similar repeat disasters in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So I think that the wounds are still raw for a lot of people that live through it today. I was struck by the fact that some of the people that stormed the United States Capitol on January 6th carried the long defunct flag of South Vietnam. So that's sort of an indication of kind of reminder about that the shadow of that war is very long and perhaps still not fully understood. It left lasting marks, both visible and invisible on many people, including me. My dad was in Vietnam when I was born, and it was only about 8 months later at a brief respite in Hawaii that I actually met him for the first time. So I think it's both revisiting for people who have memories of that time and were traumatized by it, but introducing it to people who may not realize how much it set the groundwork for the world that we live in today.
CBS News covered that war extensively. How much of the film was shaped by your access to CBS News archives?
Quite a bit, actually. CBS was, I think it's fair to say, one of the main kind of news organizations that really kind of dug in and photographed the Vietnam War. And for one reason or another, a lot of that footage just hadn't really been seen. I don't know if buried in the archive or whatever, but we really were given access and very much excited and very grateful that we had access to this treasure trove of stuff that had been photographed there, and some of these correspondence and some of these moments that remarkably had never been seen. So it is really striking. I mean, it pulls you into those moments to see this. This is a television war, but it's also a war in which the technology of image making is changing dramatically, and so you're starting to really be with handheld cameras and recording devices in ways that just didn't happen in wars before Vietnam, and so to have access to that stuff really pulls us into it. It really. I just think people that watch this series will be immersed in the events of the Vietnam War in a way they've never seen before.
And Brian, as I understand it, the film series takes a look at 3 administrations dealing with Vietnam. And I would say that the through line for the 3, lots of smart people working hard, but making a series of mistakes and blunders that they not only lie to themselves about, but they lie to the public about.
No question about that. If you look at the early days of Vietnam, we do cover primarily 3. We go back even further a little bit to the origins, but we primarily covered Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. But in the early days of the American involvement in Vietnam, the conversation around engaging militarily was deeply rooted in Cold War thinking, which goes back a little bit to the previous season of Turning Point about the Cold War. But it really came out of these, accusations were flying within the United States government about who was responsible for losing China at the time to communism. The Cold War view of communism was very, very stark. People believed, that if one country fell, that others would follow in this kind of domino effect, eventually coming to San Francisco and turning the United States communist. But yeah, doubts began to surface, even questioning the threat of communism itself, but even really early on about whether the United States could even win a war like this. And I think one of the most profound aspects of the Vietnam War and central to this series is how much figures at the highest level, those figures, Kennedy, add McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, later Johnson, Nixon, Kissinger, how much they knew that the war was a lost cause. They understood they couldn't win, but chose not to tell the American public about it, or they were to actively lie to the American public. And that betrayal of trust turned out to be a disaster. So we went through hundreds of hours, in addition to this kind of remarkable CBS footage that we found that is so immersive in this time period. We actually went through hundreds of hours of recordings, presidential recordings. These are the 3 presidents that primarily recorded themselves, presidents after this period, particularly after what happened to Nixon. Don't do that anymore, that we know of. But with the help of the presidential recordings program at the Miller Center, a lot of them, these recordings that I don't think people have ever heard before, really showed that contrast, that stark contrast, that disconnect between what presidents were saying to the American public and what they were saying and thinking, saying privately and thinking in a little more candid setting. It's pretty stark. And so mostly this war, back to your question, was really fought around presidential elections. Electoral politics of the United States dictated a lot of the decisions that were made.
My thanks to Brian Knappenberger. Turning Point, the Vietnam War, will be available on Netflix on April 30th. That marks the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report is next, right here on CBS News 24/7.